Okay, you may not know this, but there's a new drug floating around, GLP-1s. Maybe you've heard of them. However, you may not know how to navigate this new era that we're living through. So I'm going to give you a little GPS for the GLP-1 era and tell you the truth about these drugs from the perspective of a personal trainer who has done the research and is giving you the best evidence available at this time. I don't have a conflict of interest with sharing this information. I do not, for example, work with any prescribing compounding pharmacies. There's no code that you can use to order Ozempic or tirzepatide through me because I personally, within my scope of practice, cannot prescribe. I can give exercise prescription and I can give general nutrition advice, but everything else that you see on social media that is like a fitness influencer giving you a code to order a peptide is completely outside of our scope of practice. So just be aware of that. What I do want to explain to you is how GLP-1 agonists work, what the potential risks, benefits, and special considerations for taking them are, and then of course, the best practices around strength training and mindful nutrition if you do opt in collaboration with your prescribing physician to take a GLP-1. So let's imagine that for whatever reason, you and your doctor have decided that it's the best decision for you to try one of these medications. What I would say next as a trainer is let's make sure you understand the drug, which drug you're on, what dose you're on, what you're going to experience with side effects, and then how we can mitigate those side effects best to help you meet your goals. It's really never going to be my job as a trainer to pass any kind of judgment or have any kind of skepticism, frankly, about any medication that you're on as a client. If you had thyroid medication, I would want to learn about it and I would support you in meeting your goals. If you were on an SSRI for anxiety, same thing. A GLP-1 is no different. So if you do feel any amount of stigma or bias or shame around the decision to be on a medication that your doctor has decided will benefit you based on your health history, I highly recommend you get a second opinion from a different trainer and work with somebody who aligns with your values, your vision, and how you want to go about doing things, because that is your choice and that is in no way the business of your trainer, in my opinion. Now, when it comes to these GLP-1s, there's a lot of different routes that you might be on. Like you might be GLP-1 curious, or maybe you've just started on one, or perhaps you're having symptoms and plateauing, or you've gotten off of one, but you're regaining weight and you're wanting to go back on them. But regardless of what your situation is, I want you to think of kind of those old school GPS navigators like a TomTom that gave you different routes to the same destination. And there are best practices for how to navigate any phase of the medication adoption that you might be in, along with how to best serve your body through that. So when I think of a GPS, it is those different routes, but it's also kind of an acronym. The G is going to be GLP-1 Literacy, making sure you understand what drug you're on, or if you're a trainer, what drug your client might be taking, what dose they're on, what side effects might be associated with that, and just kind of knowing that those might change over time based on dose escalation, for example. Then the P of the GPS is going to be prioritizing protein, which is always so important in any weight loss journey, but especially if we're speeding that up and making that probably a more weight loss going. We want to be prioritizing protein to hold on to muscle and lean mass, basically. And then finally, strength training. That's my wheelhouse as a trainer. That is absolutely my scope of practice. And thankfully, it is exactly what I suspected it would be when I got into researching this topic for giving this talk to personal trainers. And it's basically progressive strength training, just like my program, Build with Becky. I'll link to that below if you're interested. But basically practicing major movement patterns in ideally compound multi-joint exercises in a way that kind of signals your nervous system to hold on to your lean muscle mass and attenuate muscle loss. So attenuate, just as a side note, means kind of like to lessen or reduce muscle loss, but we can't completely eliminate muscle loss on any weight loss journey, let alone with the GLP-1. So just be aware there will be some muscle loss, but you can definitely shore up your lean mass through prioritizing protein and through strength training. Now, Again, I just want to urge you, if you are, let's say, a client or a patient and you're considering these GLP-1s and you're talking to your trainer about their thoughts on them, keep in mind that trainer's scope of practice. Again, I'm a trainer. My scope of practice is not to counsel you on whether or not to start a GLP-1 or to have any opinion on it if you do. My role is to ask about the drug, understand the dosage, make sure that I know what kinds of side effects might be involved, and then honestly to stay in my lane and refer out anything else. So if I have concerns about your side effects, that's a referral to your prescribing physician. If I have concerns about the actual quantities and exact implementation of the diet and maybe nutritional deficiencies, that's going to be the lane of a registered dietitian. I'm giving general nutrition advice, and I'm making sure that we're getting and staying as strong as possible to, again, attenuate, lessen, and reduce lean muscle loss. So first, let's just kind of talk about these drugs. Everybody says Ozempic, and there's even that term Ozempic face. And really, is it always Ozempic? Obviously not. There's a lot of drugs on the market. There are more coming out every day. So you do want to keep your pulse on this topic if you're interested in it, and just know that it is a quickly evolving field. Probably by the time I hit publish on this video, it will be slightly out of date with new research. So this is the best information that we have at the time that I'm filming this in, let's say, late April of 2026. So first off, the drugs go by many names, like I said. Also, as a side note, I don't think I even mentioned this yet. Oh, I'm about to get to it. Just what is GLP-1 first off? You may or may not know that that's an endogenously occurring hormone, which just means a hormone we make internally, all of us, and that it's an incretin hormone, which just means that it helps us respond to food. So we eat and our gut releases GLP-1 naturally. Now, if you are living with obesity and you're predisposed genetically to polygenic obesity, your body might break down your natural internal endogenous reserves of GLP-1 more quickly, and therefore it might make sense, depending on your health history, depending on your risk profile for things like type 2 diabetes, heart disease, etc., to supplement GLP-1 exogenously, externally, through one of these synthetically derived medications. And this is basically going to turn the dial way up on your fullness signal. And that in turn will mean that you're less hungry, you eat less frequently, and when you eat less food, naturally creating a caloric deficit, which leads to weight loss. So where exactly do these drugs work in the body, and what are these drugs called? We'll get back to that in a moment. I kind of skipped ahead. First, they work in the brain at the hypothalamus, which is kind of the body's command and control center to just regulate hunger and fullness signals. There is a secondary side benefit location where they work in the reward circuit of the brain, and that basically quiets food noise, and there's kind of this extra bonus side effect that any kind of addictive behavior improves as well on these drugs. So for example, gambling, compulsive drinking, similar behaviors have been found to improve when taking a GLP-1. Now, they also work in the pancreas. When we eat food, the pancreas triggers insulin secretion, which helps level blood sugar and just keeps us feeling fuller for longer. And finally, in the stomach, this is probably the most well-known impact. They slow gastric emptying, which just means that food moves more slowly through the system. And that, of course, is going to keep you fuller, create that caloric deficit, lead to weight loss. However, as a side note, there's also the possibility that since that food's sticking around for longer, let's say you eat some food and then you go to the gym to work out, you might feel like that food's going to come right back up, or at least feel kind of queasy or nauseated. So just be aware you are going to want to adjust a pre-workout meal to maybe not just 30 to 60 minutes out, but 2 to 3 hours prior to a workout to feel your best. And don't work out fasted on a GLP-1, because especially if you're also on something like insulin and that already lowers your blood sugar, and then you're fasted, so your blood sugar is lowered, and then you do an intense workout and that further dips your blood sugar, that can send you over the edge into a blood sugar crash, also known as hypoglycemia. And that can be a really serious condition that can even result in passing out and all kinds of side effects. So we don't want to risk that. We do want to eat pre-workout, but make sure it's 2 to 3 hours before. Also, just expect the side effect of fatigue if you go on a GLP-1. You are in a caloric deficit, possibly a steep one. Oftentimes, people's hunger is slashed in half and they consume only 800 to 1200 calories a day. Obviously, that's not a lot of energy, so you're not going to feel very energetic as a result. And then, like I said, there's some more red flag symptoms. So be sure to read all the warnings if you decide to go on one of these drugs. There's everything from heightened risk of gallbladder events to persistent GI impacts, pancreatitis, thyroid cancer, and more. So again, when you think of what your trainer is telling you, one, they should know these things, and two, if they don't, and even if they do, frankly, they should be referring out anytime there's kind of something that's a little bit questionable, that feels a little bit off. And you should honestly feel comfortable going to your trainer and telling them how you're feeling in your body. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, again, if that goes back to if you feel any kind of stigma, bias, or shame, get a new trainer. You should find somebody who is compassionate, who is supportive, who is curious instead of judgmental in your journey. Now, let's get into the names. That's what I was going to do a little bit ago and kind of jumped ahead. So Ozempic is kind of like the Kleenex of these drugs. It's the one that everybody says because it kind of came out, not first, but it was like the most highly adopted. But that's actually the drug semaglutide. Semaglutide goes by two name brands. First, for type 2 diabetes is Ozempic at a lower dose, and then at a higher dose is its kind of sister drug, Wegovy, and that is for obesity and related chronic conditions, perhaps. Then we have tirzepatide. Tirzepatide is actually what's called a dual agonist. That means that it works not just on GLP-1, but also on a second hormone, GIP, gastric inhibitory peptide. And because it works on two mechanisms at the same time, or has a dual mechanism, it results in even greater weight loss and sometimes more symptoms if the dose is higher. So tirzepatide also goes by two name brands. Mounjaro is for type 2 diabetes at a lower dose, and its sister drug is Zepbound at a higher dose for obesity. And then there are some older drugs on the market. So the ones I just mentioned, semaglutide and tirzepatide, are the most commonly prescribed at the moment because they involve a once weekly injection. But there are some older drugs like Saxenda that goes by the name liraglutide and others. Those are less common these days simply because they involve a once daily injection, and people understandably prefer to only inject themselves once a day. Keep your eyes, like I said, peeled on this field if you're interested, because there are always new drugs being developed, and the newest kid on the block, you may or may not have heard of it, is retatrutide. Retatrutide is not yet FDA approved. It's in phase 3 trials at the time of my filming this video, and that research is due to be released in June of 2026. But if and when this drug is released, it's a triple agonist. So it will add glucagon to GLP-1 and GIP. And phase 3 trials are showing even greater weight loss, even greater reductions in HbA1c for type 2 diabetes, and a significant reduction in osteoarthritis pain. So that's another kind of bonus side effect of this drug and all of these drugs, that obviously, if you're living with a lot of extra weight and you're carrying that around every day, that's really hard on the joints, that's really hard on the body. And alleviating some of that pressure is probably going to alleviate some osteoarthritis pain and enable you to be more mobile and active in your daily life. So the actual numbers, usually when people go to their doctors and are curious about these drugs, they're understandably asking the question, will this work for me? And it's important to really know that these drugs are effective. So when it comes to semaglutide, over about 68 weeks, so a little over a year, 14.9% of body weight was reduced. On tirzepatide, that dual agonist drug, that number jumped up to 22.5%. And then on that retatrutide drug that's still in phase 3 trials, not yet FDA approved, that number is looking like it might be up to 29% of body weight reduction without plateau. Again, potentially symptoms, of course, but also great reductions like -2% of HbA1c for type 2 diabetes and a 75% reduction in osteoarthritis pain. So this is really significant stuff, very clinically significant for people. But the big question that you should be asking, in my opinion, as a trainer, is what is being lost? Because in any weight loss journey, even without a GLP-1, like I said, some lean mass will be lost. When you speed that up with medication, likely that's going to be exacerbated. And unfortunately, that is what the research is showing. Now, we will get to some things you can do to mitigate that and attenuate that, but just for the meantime, let's imagine there's no intervention. Semaglutide shows that about 45% of the weight lost comes from lean mass without intervention. And for tirzepatide, that's a little better, 34%, but that's still like a third of the weight that you're losing coming from lean mass and muscle. So let's say like you have 30 pounds that you lose on Ozempic or Wegovy, 15 of those pounds could be from muscle, which not only like aesthetically, we want probably our muscle tone, that's not what we're looking to lose, but also think about functionality and longevity and just who you're going to be and what body you're going to be walking around in 20, 40, 60 years. Is it going to be strong enough to get you through life doing the things that you love to do? Now, put another way, and this quote really stops me in my tracks, but all of that data put another way essentially boils down to this quote from a 2025 Obesity Reviews article. Participants on a GLP-1 lost an amount of muscle in 68 to 72 weeks that would normally take approximately 20 years. So think about that for a minute. That's like someone in their 40s, I'm 41, within a year and a half, having the muscle profile of someone in their 60s. And again, thankfully that's without intervention, but that's alarming. If that's not alarming to you, that makes me nervous. I want you to sit with that, to suddenly overnight be 20 years older in terms of your musculoskeletal function, strength, longevity. That's a very big deal. Now, that was without intervention, so building on that for a moment, and then we'll get to the interventions. What happens when people discontinue these drugs? Well, unfortunately, and fortunately, as we'll see, because there's always two sides to every story. Unfortunately, if there's no, change in behavior long-term and lifestyle, like if, let's say, when you go on the drug that you should probably start getting some more steps and eating better and getting to the gym, but like the scale starts going down, you feel pretty good about it and you just never get around to it. And then fast forward 6 months to a year later, all your health markers are in the green, your insurance kicks you off the drug, and then you don't have those habits and lifestyle changes in place and you try to continue maintaining your weight loss. Unfortunately, the research does show that about 2/3 of weight is regained within 1 year of stopping these drugs. And all the metabolic benefits of cardiac risk reduction, HbA1c reversal for diabetes, those are all reversed as well. Now, the reason I said unfortunately, but also fortunately, is that's without intervention. And there is a very clear intervention to avoid that outcome and to avoid that rebound weight regain if and when you choose to discontinue these drugs. So before we get to that intervention, and stay for that, please, because that's obviously the goal, I just want to point out that another way to frame all of this is that there's kind of like two sides again to what's going on when you're on these drugs. There are the very real clinical visible benefits. The scale goes down, your blood sugar regulates, you become more insulin sensitive. As a result, maybe your blood lipid profile goes down, your blood pressure improves, and just in general across the board, all your health markers improve and stabilize. That is amazing. At the same time, if that's happening at the cost of losing not just weight, but of that weight, a lot of it coming from your lean mass, for every 1 pound of muscle that you lose, you're gonna just walk around burning 6 to 10 fewer calories at rest every day. So depending on how many pounds of muscle you lose, multiply that by 6 to 10, and that's already just some amount of kind of constant caloric deficit that you would have to maintain to not regain weight if you stop this drug. But then going further, there's kind of this sneaky side effect that's hidden. You don't see it on the scale because it's really the adaptive thermogenic effect of significant weight loss. So this is basically the Biggest Loser problem all over again. After massive weight loss, this is a quote from the Biggest Loser study, which is kind of the landmark on this topic. Resting metabolic rate dropped an average of 789 calories per day. So that's over 500 calories beyond what body composition changes alone would have predicted. So again, like you can predict the 6 to 10 calories fewer per day at rest. That would be, maybe 60 to 110 calories fewer per day. You might be able to maintain that as a forever deficit. I personally wouldn't want to, but If I was really mindful, I could maybe do that, but I don't know anybody who's going to easily sustain a nearly 800 calorie deficit indefinitely. So that's really setting you up for rebound risk, because if you stop the drug at a point where your resting metabolic rate is lowered, understandably, if your hunger returns, you're going to eat more than what your body has adapted to for maintenance, and you're going to regain weight. And unfortunately, it's very rarely going to be muscle. It's usually going to be body fat. And then you'll be maybe back where you started, but potentially almost in a worse place metabolically, because you've actually lost a lot of your lean mass and replaced it with body fat. So just keep that in mind. And as a result, now I want to kind of turn from that, like, oh, that's a little scary, and nobody wants to lose all of their lean mass. And let's turn into the intervention, because we do know what to do to avoid this outcome. Okay, first, you're going to need to prioritize protein. This is, again, true on any weight loss journey, actually on any journey, in my opinion, as a trainer, whether you want to gain muscle, maintain your weight, or lose body fat, you want to prioritize protein. Protein is going to help satiate us. It's going to help maintain and build muscle. And it's just going to be the macronutrient that is the most important to keep the most consistent across any goal you have. The other two macronutrients, carbs and fats, can kind of toggle. If you like to eat higher carb, that's okay. You just eat lower fat as a result to toggle. Or if you like eating higher fat, you can eat lower carb. Obviously, you can't eat high fat and high carb, because then you're going to blow past your calories and that won't work. But as far as like which diet is best, keto or like veganism, doesn't matter. Do what you prefer, but make sure you're toggling your carbs and fats. Now, the thing with being on a GLP-1 and prioritizing protein that's tricky is that, as we've discussed, the food is moving through your system more slowly. That slowed gastric emptying is going to mean that you maybe feel nauseated a lot of the time. You're not very hungry. And as a result, your appetite might be cut in half. You might only be eating like 800 to 1200 calories a day, and not because you're resisting eating food, because you just don't think about it. Remember, that reward center has made it less rewarding to eat food. So the food noise is gone and you're just not hungry. You might even feel nauseated. So you just don't eat very much. And when you go to eat, if you're nauseated, understandably, you're probably reaching for like crackers and ginger ale, not a chicken leg. But it's very important that you anticipate this and that you get educated about the importance of protein to kind of build habits to mitigate this issue. Because if you don't eat enough protein and you're losing massive amounts of weight, part of that weight is going to be your muscle. So how much protein do you need? Now, there's a lot of numbers floating around. If you watch other YouTube videos, especially if they're even a little older than this one, you'll probably often see the number 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. Now, that used to be kind of the standard RDA, recommended daily allowance. However, even when that was the standard, and side note, that has recently been updated with the new food pyramid guidelines, regardless of how you feel about the full guidelines, I think that's a good update. But even so, the floor of the RDA was never meant for an active individual on a weight loss journey. It was meant to prevent clinical deficiency in a sedentary adult. So if you are on a GLP-1 and you are in a steep caloric deficit naturally and losing weight rapidly, and you're trying to be active at the same time, you need a lot more than the RDA. Because again, as I've mentioned several times now, and you're going to hear me say this like a broken record, if we're cutting calories, but it's coming at the cost of protein, we're losing muscle, and that's not what we want to be doing. So it's kind of like if you had a car that required premium fuel and you gave it the minimum safety warning and just regular fuel, and then you wondered why it started acting up, or worse, stalling or breaking down. We do not want you breaking down. We want you well fueled so that you hold on to the body composition that you want, that keeps you functional, strong, maybe gives you the aesthetic you're looking for, while at the same time prioritizing fat loss. So how much do you actually need? Well, the best evidence that we have, which I do want to be very transparent, is limited for a GLP-1 population. We don't have a lot yet for GLP-1 specifics, but the best indications we have are that you would probably want to prioritize about 1.2 to 2.0 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. Now, that's a little bit of a mess if you ask me, like, do you even know how much you weigh in kilograms? That's a whole thing. And then it's like a decimal 0.2 and carry the I, and it's just like kind of a math headache even for me as a trainer who understands this and has nutritional literacy. So if you are understandably not that and don't care that much, you just don't want to lose your muscle, I would recommend that you kind of aspirationally shoot for the moon and land among the stars when it comes to your protein intake. So just go for a 1-to-1 ratio. If you're like 150 pounds, go for 150 pounds of protein, or 150 pounds, wow, 150 grams of protein, excuse me, that would be a lot of protein. Even 150 grams, 150, 150, you're very unlikely to hit that number, but maybe you'll get like 100 to 120, which will actually be right in that recommended range. Now, just a little caveat, if you are like super adherent and you say, okay, Becky told me 150, 150, I'm gonna get 150, and you actually hit that number, first off, bravo, that's incredible. But also possibly be careful with that if you're on a GLP-1, because protein is 4 calories per gram. So if you multiply 150 times 4, that's about 600 of your calories coming from protein. But remember, you might only be eating 800 to 1200 calories a day on a GLP-1. So possibly if you're really, really hitting that number, you're going to crowd out things like healthy fiber, healthy fats, and those are important as well, just for digestion, feeling good, energy, micronutrient deficiencies. So if you're actually going to hit that 1-to-1, then be aware, but shooting for it, I think in practice, in theory, is a pretty good idea. Now, the other thing that I don't think a lot of people know generally, and specifically GLP-1 clients should be aware of, is that it's not just like the total protein that you're eating per day, but it's distributing that protein throughout the day. Because already, if you are on a weight loss journey, and then furthermore, if it's assisted by medication, so it's a speedier, more intense weight loss journey, you are going to be kind of not anabolic, not building muscle, but catabolic, breaking muscle down. So to mitigate that, we want to give your body as many opportunities to engage in what's called muscle protein synthesis, which is basically when we eat enough leucine, which is an amino acid that is part of protein. So let's say we eat like a piece of chicken, we eat a protein shake or drink a protein shake. When there's enough leucine in a meal, it triggers muscle protein synthesis, which just kind of levels out, even spikes our muscle protein to build or at least maintain muscle if there's enough. But that only lasts so long, and then it kind of evens out a few hours later. So then we need another bolus of protein, and then it evens out. And then we need another one, and then it evens out. So I would actually recommend that you think of not just a daily number, but a per meal target, maybe 25 to 40 grams of protein per meal, split up over 3 to 4 meals throughout the day. That way, again, you're kind of shooting for the moon, and hopefully when you add up all of your meals and snacks, each one is going to have some protein in it. Each of those meals, you're going to eat the protein first to spike that potential for muscle protein synthesis to mitigate muscle loss. Now, you might have also heard floating around the idea of an anabolic window, that you need to eat within like 45 minutes of your workout or you're going to lose all your gains. Further research has demonstrated that that anabolic window is much more flexible than we originally thought, and that you have more time than you think, probably several hours. But it is still useful to put protein around training, just so you know. And then in addition, there's another myth floating around that the body can't process more than 30 grams of protein at a time. That is also false. In fact, if you're an older individual, middle-aged or older, you also are becoming what's called anabolically resistant, which again just means your body is kind of walking around. It's no longer anabolic. It's not easily building muscle. It's anabolically resistant. It's catabolic. It's breaking muscle down. This is what happens as we get older in age. We need more protein to have the same chance at muscle protein synthesis. So we might actually need up to like 40 grams in a meal in order to even trigger muscle protein synthesis with enough leucine. So just know you can have more than 30 grams per meal. You can have it throughout the day ideally, and it can be longer than 30 to 45 minutes post-workout. Now, just some really practical protein strategies that I would recommend for anyone on a GLP-1, and honestly, even not on a GLP-1, is do some kind of a protein audit right away so that you understand where you're at and then you can grow from there. So, for example, be honest about who you are and what your nutritional literacy level is. It might just be taking pictures of food at first and trying to identify the source of protein on your plate. It might be doing a food journal and writing down what you eat, what time it is, how it made you feel. Maybe you want to try a macro tracker. I personally like Macro Factor, and I believe if you use the code Jeff for Jeff Nippard, who is one of the creators, you get a free 2-week trial. I am not in any way linked to them, but I just personally use it and enjoy the app. So up to you, but what I would recommend for this audit is don't change anything, just track what you're doing so that you get a baseline of, okay, I eat 60 grams of protein a day. That's not enough. And then from there, think about your 1-to-1 ratio. If you weigh 150, you're going for 150. Now, you're not going to go from 60 grams of protein to 150 grams of protein overnight. Maybe the next week you try for 75, and the next week you try for 100. And the next week 125, and eventually you're gonna get there. And I promise, protein is sneaky. Once you get used to prioritizing it, you're gonna blow past your protein target. I promise. I've had this experience with multiple clients who have started tracking and prioritizing, and before long, they realize protein is so easy to prioritize and hit, and now it's difficult to get their fats or their carbs in. So you'll surprise yourself, I promise. Then, like I said, really make yourself have kind of a strict protein first rule. So every meal and every snack has protein in it. And I really recommend every first bite for a while be protein as well. Just so that, one, you're getting a lot of practice identifying the protein, including the protein, and of course, consuming the protein. Now, there are some ways if you're on a GLP-1 to do this that will maybe feel better because you're going to not be very hungry. So there's, a whole bunch of proteins. Ask ChatGPT or Google or leave a comment and I can comment a huge list for you. But I would recommend something that's stackable and easy to tolerate. So for example, if you are not allergic in any way and if you tolerate them well, let's say you want to do some kind of scramble for breakfast, you could do eggs plus extra egg whites plus cottage cheese, mix it all up together to make a scramble. And that's going to be a relatively small volume that sits well in your stomach, but is a lot of protein right away to start your day. There are also lean meat sources, poultry, fish, seafood, and vegetarian sources like edamame, tempeh, etc. So just try a bunch, see what you like, and then, like I said, stack them together to really get more bang for your buck. Protein shakes, of course, are convenient, as are bars, but we don't want them to be replacing meals or to become a long-term crutch. They might be extra helpful when you're first getting started and you have more symptoms or when you're escalating your dose. Of course, you probably are going to learn naturally, but avoiding larger portions or heavy, greasy foods is probably going to feel best. All right, now that you kind of understand these drugs, you are a little bit more GLP-1 literate, you understand how important protein, not just total throughout the day, but per meal targets spread out evenly are. Let's talk about my wheelhouse that I love, progressive strength training, and how important it is. So first off, this is just like a caveat for this section. I hinted at it with protein, but even more so with strength training. We just don't have a lot of research yet on GLP-1 use plus even exercise generally, let alone strength training specifically. So what we're kind of doing in this section is taking the best evidence we have about exercise and strength training and the best evidence we have about GLP-1s, and we're kind of cobbling them together and extrapolating to get the best recommendations for you. So I just want to be very transparent about that. And again, keep your eye on this research. It's always changing and evolving. Now, when it comes to resistance training, I love it just personally. It's probably my favorite activity in the world. There's just something about getting strong in the gym that I think is such a beautiful metaphor for getting strong in life. And when you accomplish a goal in the gym thinking, oh man, what could I do in my life? I am strong and capable here. Where else in my life am I stronger than I think I am? Beyond that kind of mindset metaphor that I think is so beautiful, there are studies that look at, for example, not even with the GLP-1, but just folks on a weight loss journey, when they engage in diet alone, up to 81% of groups engaged in weight loss lose of the weight they lose, 15% of it is from their lean mass. Now, when they add any kind of exercise in, which I'm guessing these studies are more like circuit training and cardio based, just because that tends to be the norm, that number gets cut in half by, like, goes down to 39%. And that's any kind of exercise. But then the best possible outcome is with resistance training. And this shows that it results in the greatest fat loss and maintaining and preserving lean mass. And of course, also along with that, your function and your strength. So just in general, exercise hierarchy shows some exercise is better than none. And if you're exercising, resistance training is best. Now, for the limited evidence that we have about GLP-1 use plus exercise, we're looking at a trial called the S-LiTE trial. And this study followed, I believe it was 195 adults, and they were randomized into 3 groups: exercise only, liraglutide only, that's one of the older drugs, remember, and then a combination group that used both. And perhaps unsurprisingly, the combination group performed best across every metric. So their HbA1c was lowered the most, they became the most insulin sensitive, and their cardiorespiratory fitness improved the most. And even better, 1 year later, when they followed up with study participants, those who had been engaged in a structured exercise program were better able to maintain their results than those who took the drug in isolation. So best kind of recommendations for strength and conditioning come from the ACSM position stand, recently updated in 2026. I'll try to put a bunch of these citations in the video description below if you're interested. But this is probably nothing new to you if you are a trainer or if you've done any amount of strength training. It should look pretty straightforward. 2 to 3 full body sessions a week, 8 to 20 reps per set, 1 to 4 reps per exercise, hitting major muscle groups, 2 to 3 minutes of rest between those sets, and working at 40 to 80% of 1 rep max, which is like moderate heavy weight. Also prioritizing the major movement patterns: squat, hinge, push, pull, carry, and most importantly, progressively overloading over time. And that just means adding a couple reps, a set, some load, something every week. Maybe not in everything every week, but over time the trend is upward, that strength is improving. So that in and of itself, great to know if you're new to this. Again, I'll link it below. Great information to have. If you just want a program that incorporates all of that, again, my program Build with Becky does so. Feel free to check that out as well. I'll link it below. But what I found even more compelling was that the ACSM, which stands for the American Council of Sports Medicine, their biggest recommendation after seeing that self-reports demonstrated that up to 60% of Americans engage in no resistance training whatsoever. That's a bummer. That hurts my heart, but understandable. Their recommendation, therefore, is to individualize programs to increase resistance training participation. And I think that makes total sense. Like, think about what my title is. I'm a personal trainer. I work with people. So I want to give personalized options. I want people to be able to individualize their experience. And I want to be able to educate more effectively, as a result, build rapport and help people meet their goals. Now, over time, a lot of times when trainers work with clients, depending on their certification organization's recommendations, but I think generally people tend to start at lighter weights and maybe more reps and add sets and reps, and then over time, fewer reps, heavier weights, fewer reps yet, heavier weights, only a couple sets and reps and really heavy weights. That's kind of the strength continuum in a nutshell. You're kind of going from muscular endurance through hypertrophy and strength into even maybe a power phase. That's definitely what my practice generally is. It's called linear periodization. Now, while that is in general a best practice, I would say that there's a space here when you're on a GLP-1, particularly if you're in just beginning phase or dose escalation phase. There are just going to be days when you wake up and you're not feeling your best and you're nauseated, and you're going to be tempted to text your trainer if you're in person with them and say, I don't think I can come in today. So what I would recommend for this is either a program, again, like mine, where you can kind of self-auto-regulate with what's called the RPE scale, rate of perceived exertion. I'll try to put a little picture here if I remember, and if I can, or I'll link to it. And basically what this is a scale where you can self-assess after a set, how hard did that feel? How many more reps could I have done with good form? And as a result, what do I feel like my RPE is, 1 to 10? At first, you might not be super sure, and you can just kind of guess, and then over the weeks, you'll get better at this. But why I think this is useful is because if you're feeling kind of off one day, or for several days, which could happen on these drugs, we don't want you to just drop everything. Because again, if you're not challenging your muscle, it's not going to stick around. So I would so much rather a client do my program and just keep it at what I call the baby giraffe week, the first week, going to 6 out of 10, and at least keep showing up and maintaining something. Something is always going to be better than nothing here. So using RPE, and maybe you're overloading more and I'm adding sets, I'm adding reps. You don't need to go super heavy unless you want to. If you're feeling good, absolutely. But you don't need to be doing like 2 reps at 90% of your 1 rep max, if you even know what that means. You can just kind of do some weight, see how it feels, 1 to 10, maybe add another set, maybe add a couple more reps on those days and weeks that you're not feeling your best. And then finally, some specific things to be aware of, let's say, especially if you're in person with a trainer and you're on a GLP-1, just make sure, one, that they know you're on a GLP-1. That is the worst when you're training somebody and maybe they have like a hypoglycemia episode, which we'll get into in a moment, and they start shaking, they're pale, they're sweating, but like you're holding like a 5-pound dumbbell and you don't know what's going on because your client hasn't revealed to you that they're taking this medication. So please be transparent with your coach. Again, if for some reason you don't feel safe or comfortable doing that, that should be a sign to you to potentially ask yourself why that is, because you should feel supported. You should feel like you're working with someone who shares your values and is aligned and is not going to judge your decision to be on a medication if that's what your doctor has indicated is the right move for you. Regardless, getting off of that soapbox now, make sure that you're mindful of when your sessions are scheduled, because let's say you inject Sunday night and then you have a session Monday morning. You might be kind of nauseated on Monday morning. So maybe think about asking your doctor, because you can't do this on your own and your trainer can't tell you, FYI, scope of practice, your trainer can't tell you to move your injection back. But if your doctor says, yeah, sure, you can move it back to Friday so that you're ready to train on Monday, great. But if not, if you need to inject Sunday, then ask your trainer to reschedule your session for maybe Wednesday or Thursday, okay? Also make sure you're eating pre-session. We'll talk about why with hypoglycemia in a moment. Use that RPE to kind of self-auto-regulate how you're feeling intra-session. Also, remember those GI side effects could include vomiting and diarrhea, which could exacerbate dehydration risks. So make sure you're hydrating pre, intra, and post-workout. And then also, I really encourage you, ideally with your trainer, but depending on the circumstance, the timing, whatever, maybe on your own as well, really start looking for a lot of different signs of progress and feedback. So yes, the scale will move and that will probably be very exciting and motivating. And there's nothing wrong with that, except we don't want to give the scale so much power that if and when it stalls, we feel like shit. That's not what we're after here. The scale is not telling the whole story. So let's also maybe take a hip and waist ratio. Let's track our lifts and see how much we're squatting, hinging, pushing, and pulling week to week. Let's track our sleep and see how that's feeling. Maybe track our grams of protein and how adherent we are to that. Perhaps another habit like getting steps and slowly building up to 10,000 steps a day. And are we able to maintain that? And then this is the thing. Let's say the scale plateaus 6 months in. If we then can look at our hip to waist ratio and the waist has gone down an inch or two, our squat has gone up, our sleep is better than ever, and we're getting 10,000 steps a day, I can guarantee you there is no problem there. The scale is just not telling the whole story. You are very likely engaged in body recomposition. So help yourself paint a bigger holistic picture. Speaking of pictures, progress pictures are a great metric as well. And help yourself see your progress in multiple ways, and don't let the scale dictate how you feel about your journey. Now let's talk about hypoglycemia for a moment, because like I said, this has happened to me and it's kind of scary when a client goes suddenly pale and shaky and it's like with a 10-pound dumbbell and you're like, that's not the cause. What's going on here? So this could happen if a client is perhaps diabetic and they're on insulin, which lowers blood sugar, and maybe they either naturally weren't hungry so they fasted, or they fasted because that's their general practice. Maybe they're psychologically like, I'm going to save all my calories for dinner and eat whatever I want. Side note, don't love that mentality. We're hopefully not just losing weight here. We're hopefully also cultivating a better relationship with our bodies through whatever journey we're on, whether it's medically assisted or not. So try to catch those kinds of thoughts, by the way, and like work through what's behind that. Like, do you need to save all your calories for dinner? Will there be enough? Your hunger is diminished. You're probably going to be okay. And in fact, remember, back to muscle protein synthesis, if you want to hold on to your lean muscle, you probably want to eat throughout the day. If you're going to hit that huge 1-to-1 ratio of your protein target for the day, you probably need to split it up throughout the day. So think about all of those pieces of the equation. But going back to hypoglycemia, maybe the person is fasted, so they're already kind of low blood sugar. They take insulin, that dips their blood sugar, and then the session is intense, that also dips blood sugar. So suddenly it's kind of like a car that the body's like a car running on glucose, and when the brain and the body kind of stall out, first the brain function goes. That's going to look like dizziness, confusion, and then the body's going to follow. So maybe the shakiness, sweating, possibly even into passing out. So the thing to know about this for yourself, and then hopefully your trainer will know this as well, feel free to share with them. I'll put below the hypoglycemia protocol, kind of the 15-15 rule. If you are a diabetic, please start carrying glucose tablets with you. And again, let your trainer know that you're diabetic. Let them know that you have glucose tablets either on your person or in your bag. Ask them to maybe have candy or soda around just in case, because if you start feeling this way, you want to stop the session, sit or lie down, and then get about 15 grams of glucose in quickly. That could be like half a can of soda, not diet, or juice. Could be a handful of candy. If you have glucose tablets, take 3 to 4 of them, and then wait 15 minutes, see how you feel. Repeat that if necessary, and then after that, follow up with some complex carbs. And hopefully your trainer is going to document what happened, ask you some questions about whether you ate beforehand or not, and then as a result, remind you of that pre-workout fueling that's so important, and hydration, and maybe also encourage you to go to your doctor and see if you need to adjust your dosage. One last thing, when we talk about strength training, it's super important that we're not just doing this willy-nilly. Again, any kind of exercise. It's all exercise is good. Don't get me wrong. Walking's good. Cardio is good. All movement is good movement. But when it comes to what we're trying to preserve here, resistance training, again, is going to be the gold standard, because it's going to help you maintain your lean mass, but also your bone density. So unfortunately, there is a study that shows that liraglutide alone reduces spine and hip bone mineral density, but thankfully exercise alone preserves it. So let's just put everything together, and if you're on a GLP-1, make sure you're also exercising. Make that exercise largely strength training, in addition to maybe steps for some general movement throughout your day, cardio that can also help with digestion after a meal, for example, which helps even more regulate your blood sugar. By the way, having more muscle on your frame, which again comes from strength training plus protein, also helps you be more insulin sensitive. So just walking around with more muscle is going to help make you more resistant to type 2 diabetes, for example. So yeah, put these all together. If your doctor recommends it, the GLP-1, prioritize the protein, strength train, and what that's going to result in is the greatest weight loss, but most of it coming from body fat while preserving your lean mass as well as your bone mineral density. So the best possible outcome with the most aesthetic body recomposition, most likely. So when it comes to how you approach this era of GLP-1 usage, I want you to kind of have this checklist in mind. The GPS, the G again, is your GLP-1 literacy. You know now, not all the drugs are Ozempic. They have different dosages. Depending on the dose, the side effects could be more severe. There are also those side effects to watch out for that are kind of red flag, that should be referred out to your doctor and not just addressed with your trainer. For P, you're going to be prioritizing protein, not just a 1-to-1 ratio for the day, but also 30 to 40 grams per meal or snack throughout your day to make it more likely to hold on to as much of your muscle as possible through getting muscle protein synthesis spikes throughout your day. And then finally, when it comes to strength training, you're going to find a program, could be like mine again, just got to toot my own horn. It's a great program. It's evidence-based. It's exactly what's recommended for clients on a GLP-1. It hits all the major movement patterns, squat, hinge, push, pull, and teaches you how to auto-regulate and self-progressively overload. Because as much as I do love training people in person, and I think if you're brand new, go find a trainer in person, please. And again, if your trainer, for whatever reason, isn't making you feel safe, secure, comfortable, stigma-free, find a new trainer, please. But if at some point in your life you know the basics and your schedule is not such that you have like 10 a.m. on Tuesday available every week with your trainer, that's understandable. That's why I built my program, so that there are options built in. You can still individualize, you can still personalize to your level, to your preference, to your equipment, and then you can also self-assess and auto-regulate your RPE over time. So find a program or find a coach that's going to support your journey so that you can know that you are protecting your lean mass, your bone density, and your overall, not just aesthetic of how you'd like to look, but also your longevity and function in this life to do anything you want to do. Now, I think that the GLP-1 era is a fascinating one for many reasons. I think that there are many trainers out there and just people, members of the general population, that probably think that folks on a GLP-1 are taking the easy way out, quote unquote. I personally, my edge for growth has been to try on a little bit more curiosity as opposed to skepticism or judgment, and honestly just more body neutrality. That's actually kind of one of my values as a trainer. You know, any client I work with, and I strive to apply this to myself as well, when my body is like more or less fit or bigger or smaller, it's not better or worse. It's just my body, and it's kind of the least interesting thing about me. But my body is very important in that it gets me through life, and it's my vehicle to do anything I want to do in this world. So I strive to just be neutral about it. I don't need to love my body every day. I don't need to reward it with food or deprive it or try to work something off. I can be neutral about my body. I can be grateful for it, and I can take care of it. At the same time, when I think about medications, I can have an agnostic approach to them. I'm not going to judge if a person's on a thyroid medication or a blood pressure medication, so why would I judge if they're on a GLP-1? I would like to know so that I can help educate and support them in their journey and look out for any red flags and help them understand how best to meet their goals in a sustainable way. But I do not in any way make that decision. Again, that's outside of my scope, and I don't need to pass any form of judgment on it. So I hope that even as a member of the general population, if you're watching this and curious, you might try on that mindset as well of just kind of diet and medication agnosticism, body neutrality, and curiosity over judgment. And I hope that if you are considering a GLP-1 or you're on one and your doctor has decided that that's the right course for you, that you're able to come to a place where you feel good about that decision, you have your own back in that decision, and you feel comfortable telling friends, family members, your trainer, and anyone else who could be supportive to you about it. Because I truly think that's how we change this conversation. We have enough weight stigma and bias in our society, even in the medical system, unfortunately. So let's change that one conversation at a time, one video at a time, one question at a time, and one workout at a time. I think that we can find a way to do this better. Thanks for being here. I hope you learned something, and if you have any questions, please feel free to leave them below.